I never thought I would hear my mother's scream echo through the neighborhood like that. A sound so raw, so broken, that it cut straight into my chest and froze my blood. My mom was the kind of woman who never raised her voice at anyone, the one who'd bake pies for new neighbors and check on kids walking home from school if their parents weren't around. She was fragile in age but strong in spirit, and everyone loved her for it. So when I ran out of my house and saw her on the ground clutching her face while the HOA president, Karen, stood over her with rage still dripping from her twisted expression, something inside me cracked. The world around me blurred, the neighbors gasped, and my mother's trembling hands reached out for me as if I could fix the nightmare that had just unfolded. It all started that morning with something so small, so insignificant, that no one in their right mind would have made it into a war. My mother had hung a wind chime on our porch, a gift from my late father. It was nothing fancy, just a simple wooden piece with soft metal rods that sang quietly when the wind touched them. My father had given it to her on their 30th anniversary, telling her that every time it rang, it meant he was still around, still loving her even after death. To my mom, that wind chime wasn't decoration. It was his voice. But to Karen, the HOA president, it was a violation of some ridiculous bylaw she enforced like she was the queen of the land. Karen had already warned us twice before about the wind chime. My mom tried explaining the sentimental value, begging her for compassion, but Karen's face remained cold as stone. "Rules are rules," she'd snapped, holding her clipboard like a sword. My mom had tears in her eyes that day, but she refused to take it down. "This is my home," she whispered to me later, "and no one, not even her, can silence your father's memory." By the afternoon, I had gone inside to finish some paperwork when I heard the yelling outside. Karen had stormed onto our porch like she owned it, demanding the wind chime be taken down immediately. My mom, standing her ground, told her once again it was staying. What happened next was something no one could have ever imagined. In her blind rage, Karen shoved my mother, a frail woman of 72, down the steps. And when my mom struggled to get up, Karen raised her hand and struck her across the face. The sound of that slap, the brutality of it, made the whole street fall into stunned silence. The moment I saw my mom fall to the concrete, her face pale and her eyes filled with pain, I lost all sense of calm. My knees nearly buckled as I ran toward her, shouting her name. Neighbors were frozen in shock, phones shaking in their hands as they recorded the scene. No one could believe what they had just witnessed. A grown woman, the so-called leader of the HOA, attacking an elderly widow in broad daylight. I dropped to the ground beside my mom, gently cradling her head in my hands. "Mom, I'm here," I whispered, my voice breaking as I searched her face for injuries. Blood trickled from the corner of her lip, her glasses shattered, and her hands trembled as she tried to hold on to me. My heart ached so violently I thought it might burst from my chest. All I wanted was to protect her, to shield her from the cruelty of that monster standing smugly above us. Karen didn't even look sorry. Instead, she scoffed and muttered something about teaching her a lesson. That's when the anger in me turned into something darker. I rose to my feet slowly, my body shaking with fury, and glared at her. "You just assaulted my mother," I spat, my voice low but deadly. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" Karen folded her arms like a queen unbothered by peasants. "She broke the rules. Maybe now she'll finally learn respect." The way she said it, as if my mom deserved what she got, made every single neighbor gasp in disgust. You could feel the shift in the crowd. What once was fear of Karen's authority was now pure hatred for her cruelty. And then, like the heavens themselves had intervened, the distant sound of sirens pierced the air. Someone had already called the police. Karen's smug smile faltered for the first time, and she glanced around nervously as the blue and red lights flickered down the street. My mom clutched my hand tighter, her whisper weak but firm. "Don't let her win." The squad car pulled up fast, two officers stepping out with serious expressions. The neighbors, still shaken, pointed at Karen in unison, their voices overlapping with cries of, "She hit her! She shoved her! It's all on video!" The officers barely had to ask questions. There was no denying what had happened. My mom's injuries, the horrified crowd, the countless phones recording every second, it was undeniable. Karen's face twisted into panic as the officers approached her. She stammered excuses, claiming she was just defending HOA rules, but the more she spoke, the more pathetic she sounded. One officer glanced at me, his eyes softening as he looked at my mom on the ground, then back at Karen with disgust. Without hesitation, he pulled out his handcuffs. "Ma'am, you're under arrest for assaulting an elderly woman," he said firmly, his voice echoing down the street. The sound of the handcuffs snapping around her wrists was the most satisfying noise I had ever heard. Karen screamed in protest, insisting it was all a mistake, but no one bought her lies anymore. The neighbors cheered quietly, some even clapping as she was led toward the police car. And for the first time in years, I saw fear, not power, on Karen's face. But even as justice seemed to arrive in that moment, I knew this was far from over. My mother's trembling body in my arms was proof of the scars Karen had already left behind. And deep down, a storm of vengeance began to build inside me. She thought arrest was the worst consequence. No, this was only the beginning. I would make sure Karen paid for every ounce of pain she had inflicted, not just on my mother, but on everyone she had ever bullied in this neighborhood. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. It was about reclaiming dignity, about showing her that no amount of power or rules could protect her from the truth. And I promised my mom, silently in that moment, that I wouldn't stop until Karen's empire of fear crumbled to ashes. The image of Karen being pushed into the back of that police car should have been enough to give me peace, but as I sat on the porch steps holding my mother's hand, I felt no relief. My mom's face was pale, her eyes swollen from crying, and the faint mark of Karen's slap was still burning on her cheek. I could hear her shallow breaths, could feel the tremor in her fingers, and I knew that this wasn't something a simple apology or even an arrest could erase. This was deeper. This was humiliation. This was trauma carved into her soul by someone who had always abused her authority. The neighbors crowded around us, murmuring their shock and anger. Some brought water, others offered tissues, but my mom barely spoke. She just kept whispering, "Why would she do this? What did I do to her?" I didn't have the heart to tell her the truth, that Karen thrived on power and cruelty. That to her, my mom was just another person to break, another trophy in her reign of terror. When the ambulance arrived, the paramedics insisted on checking her over. She resisted at first, embarrassed by the attention, but I reminded her that Dad would want her to be safe. The mention of him softened her, and she allowed them to lift her gently into the stretcher. I rode with her, gripping her hand tightly as the siren wailed through the night. She looked so fragile under the hospital's fluorescent lights, her hair tangled, her lips swollen, and her spirit bruised in a way I couldn't bear to see. While the doctors examined her, I sat in the waiting room with my fists clenched. Neighbors, faces replayed in my head, their gasps, their anger, their silence all mixing together into a storm. Karen had ruled over all of us for years, dictating what colors we could paint our houses, what plants we could grow, what cars we could park in our own driveways. People whispered about her behind closed doors, but no one dared confront her openly. She thrived because everyone was too afraid to fight back. Until now, the doctor finally came out and assured me that my mother would recover physically. No broken bones, just bruises and emotional trauma. But the words emotional trauma hit me harder than anything else. My mom wasn't just hurt, she had been humiliated in front of her community. She had been made to feel powerless, and that to me was unforgivable. When I returned home later that night, the neighborhood felt different. People lingered outside, whispering about what had happened, replaying the moment on their phones. A few came up to me, telling me how brave my mom was, how sorry they felt. One neighbor, Mrs. Carter, a sweet older lady who had often clashed with Karen over her garden decorations, said something that stuck with me. "What Karen did tonight, she showed her true face, but you have a chance to show her she's not invincible." I barely slept. My mind kept flashing back to my mom's trembling voice, to Karen's smug smirk before the police arrived. I could still hear the slap, see the way my mother staggered, feel the weight of her pain in my arms. And each memory only fanned the flames of something growing inside me. This wasn't going to end with Karen spending a night in jail. No, that was only the surface. I wanted to dig deeper. I wanted to destroy the empire she had built on intimidation and fear. The next morning, I visited my mom at the hospital. She was sitting up in bed, her glasses replaced, her face still marked but calmer. When I walked in, she gave me a tired smile. "I don't want you to worry, sweetheart," she whispered. "She's already been punished. The police took her away. Let's just leave it at that." Her words broke me in a different way. My mom was always forgiving, always ready to take the higher road. But I couldn't, not this time. I sat beside her, holding her hand. "Mom," I said softly, "she humiliated you in front of everyone. She tried to make you feel small. I can't just let her walk away with a slap on the wrist. I promise you, she will never hurt you again. Not you, not anyone." Tears welled in her eyes, and she shook her head weakly. "Don't let hate consume you," she warned. But I could see in her gaze that a small part of her, buried under the pain, wanted justice too. When I left the hospital, I didn't go home. Instead, I drove to the county records office. If Karen was the self-appointed queen of the HOA, I needed to know exactly what gave her that power. I requested copies of the HOA bylaws, financial reports, and meeting minutes. What I found was a goldmine of arrogance and corruption. She had been funneling HOA funds into maintenance projects that barely existed. She charged outrageous fines for petty violations, fines that often seemed to disappear without a trace. She held votes where no ballots were ever counted. The more I dug, the angrier I became. Karen wasn't just a bully, she was a thief. And the neighborhood wasn't her community, it was her kingdom, one she ruled with fear and deception. But kingdoms, I reminded myself, could fall. All it took was one spark. That night, I started gathering allies. I visited the neighbors who had always grumbled about her but stayed silent. I showed them the documents I uncovered, proof of her corruption. Their shock quickly turned to outrage. Mr. Daniels, whose son Karen had fined for playing basketball in the driveway, clenched his fists as he read the papers. "We've all been her victims," he growled. "It's time someone stood up to her." One by one, people began to join me. We weren't just angry, we were united. Karen had created enemies everywhere she went, and now those enemies were ready to fight back. Meanwhile, word spread that Karen had posted bail and would be returning home soon. The thought of her walking back into the neighborhood with her smug grin made my stomach twist. But this time, she wouldn't be greeted with fear. She would be greeted with resistance. As I stood on my porch, staring at the wind chime my mom had refused to take down, I felt a sense of resolve stronger than ever. Karen had attacked my family, broken the heart of the sweetest woman I knew, and thought she could get away with it. But she underestimated us. She underestimated me. And when she returned, she would learn the one truth she never believed possible. Her reign was over. When Karen came back to the neighborhood after posting bail, she strutted down the street like nothing had happened. It made my stomach churn. She had a bandage on her wrist from the handcuffs, but her arrogance was untouched. She acted as if the police had only inconvenienced her, as if my mother's bloodied lip and broken glasses were just a detail she could sweep under the rug. The neighbors stood outside their homes, some glaring, some whispering, but no one dared say a word. Karen smirked as though she still owned them. I watched from my porch, the wind chime ringing softly above me like my father's voice reminding me to stay strong. My mom sat inside, resting, but I could see the sadness in her eyes whenever Karen's name was mentioned. She had become afraid to even sit on her own porch, afraid that woman might come back for her. That fear burned me from the inside out. I wanted to rip it out of her heart and replace it with peace. That night, I gathered with the neighbors I'd spoken to before. We met quietly in Mr. Daniels' garage, the same man whose son had been fined by Karen for leaving his basketball hoop out for too many hours. The room buzzed with anger, but also nervous energy. People had lived under Karen's thumb for years, and breaking free of her grip felt almost unreal. I spread the documents I had collected across the table, copies of the HOA bylaws, bank statements, suspicious expense reports. "She's been stealing from all of us," I said firmly. "She's been fining us for things that don't exist, pocketing money that should have gone into community projects and abusing her position. We have the evidence. We can bring her down." Mrs. Carter, the sweet older lady who loved her garden, leaned forward with tears in her eyes. "I've lived here 30 years. I've never seen anyone hurt people the way she does. Your poor mother, she didn't deserve that. None of us did." The room filled with murmurs of agreement. Faces once filled with fear now burned with determination. Mr. Daniels slammed his fist on the table. "Then it's time to fight back. She can't scare us all forever." It was the first time in years that I saw hope in their eyes. For too long, Karen had been untouchable because she made people believe she was. But now, with the community united, she was vulnerable, and I was going to make sure that vulnerability turned into her downfall. The first step was to call an emergency HOA meeting. According to the bylaws I had dug up, the members actually had the right to remove the president with a majority vote, but Karen had manipulated the process so no one even knew it was possible. We drafted a petition and went door to door, explaining what we'd uncovered. People signed eagerly, some with shaking hands, some with furious strokes of their pens. By the end of the day, we had more than enough signatures to force the meeting. When Karen got wind of it, she stormed to my house, red-faced and fuming. She banged on my door so hard the wind chime rattled above her head. I opened it just enough to see her sneer. "You think you're smart," she hissed. "You think gathering your little mob will save you? I run this place. I always will." I stood tall, keeping my voice steady though my heart pounded. "You don't run anything anymore, Karen. You assaulted my mother in front of everyone, and now we have proof of all your corruption. Your time is up." Her eyes narrowed, and for the first time I saw something flicker in them, fear. She masked it quickly with a laugh, but I knew she felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. She jabbed her finger at me. "You're making a mistake. You'll regret this." Then she stormed off, her heels striking the pavement like gunshots. The night of the meeting arrived, and tension hung heavy in the air. The community hall, usually half empty during Karen's monotonous lectures, was packed with neighbors whispering and clutching papers. My mother sat beside me, her cheeks still bruised but her eyes filled with quiet pride. She had begged me not to go too far, but she came anyway, to stand by me, to stand for herself. Karen walked in last, trying to project her usual superiority, but the murmurs and glares told me everything had changed. She cleared her throat and tried to start the meeting as usual, but Mr. Daniels cut her off, standing tall with the petition in hand. "We, the members of this HOA, demand a vote to remove Karen as president effective immediately." Gasps filled the room, followed by applause. Karen's face went pale as he read off the bylaws, the very ones she thought no one would ever bother to look up. She tried to interrupt, tried to shout over him, but the voices of the people drowned her out. One by one, they raised their hands when the vote was called. It was overwhelming. Nearly everyone wanted her gone. As the final tally was counted, Karen's face twisted with desperation. "You can't do this. I built this community. You're nothing without me." I stood up, my voice calm but sharp. "No, Karen, we're stronger without you. You tried to break us. You tried to break my mother, but tonight we break you." The vote passed. Karen was officially removed as president. She stood there trembling, her power slipping from her fingers, her empire crumbling around her. And in that moment, with the neighbors cheering, I felt the first taste of justice. But as sweet as it was, I knew it wasn't enough. She had hurt too many people, stolen too much money, and thought she could walk away untouched. Removing her from the HOA was victory, but destroying her completely, that was the real goal. As I walked my mother home that night, the wind chime rang softly in the breeze, and I whispered to her, "This is only the beginning." Karen didn't take her downfall quietly. The night after the vote, while most of the neighbors celebrated the end of her reign, I stood awake by the window, staring into the street. I knew her too well to believe she would just give up. Karen wasn't the kind of person who accepted defeat. She was the kind of person who burned everything down just to feel like she still had control. Sure enough, by morning, she had started her counterattack. Letters slipped into mailboxes accusing me and my family of staging the assault. Emails blasted to the entire neighborhood, calling me a manipulator and liar, claiming the documents I'd shown everyone were forged. She even tried to convince people that my mom had faked her injuries to gain sympathy. The audacity of it made my hands shake with rage. My mom, a woman who still flinched when she heard the slam of a door because it reminded her of that night, was being painted as a fraud. When I showed her one of Karen's letters, my mom's lips trembled. "Why can't she just leave us alone?" she whispered. I put my hand over hers and promised, "Because she doesn't know how, but trust me, Mom, we're going to end this, not just for us, for everyone." Karen underestimated me. She thought I'd fight her with just words, but I wasn't stopping there. I wanted the truth to come out on a scale so big she couldn't twist it anymore. That meant taking everything I had to the authorities. I spent days gathering every shred of evidence. The bank statements, the fake fines, the receipts that led to nowhere. I compiled testimony from neighbors, people she had threatened, fined, and bullied. Even kids came forward with stories of how she would scream at them for riding bikes too close to her lawn. Piece by piece, her mask of control was stripped away, replaced by the image of a tyrant who had hidden behind the title of HOA president. But the most powerful piece of evidence wasn't in the documents. It was in the videos. Multiple neighbors had captured her attacking my mom from different angles. You could hear her voice, see her shove, watch the slap land across my mother's fragile face. That was the truth no lie could erase. I took it all to the county prosecutor's office. At first, the receptionist looked skeptical. HOA disputes weren't exactly new. But when I handed over the folder, the weight of what I had collected spoke for itself. The prosecutor, a tall man with a stern face, flipped through the files and leaned back in his chair. "This isn't just HOA drama," he said. "This is fraud, this is embezzlement, this is assault, and this is going to court." When I walked out of that office, the sun was setting, casting golden light across the neighborhood. For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope, not just for my family, but for everyone Karen had hurt. Of course, when Karen was served with the official notice, she erupted. Neighbors told me she screamed so loudly, you could hear her 3 streets away. She pounded on her door, called lawyers, and shouted threats about ruining me for good. But the difference now was simple. Nobody cared. The neighbors who once cowered under her glare now watched her downfall with satisfaction. My mom, though, still carried fear. One evening she sat with me on the porch, the wind chime swaying softly. "I don't want to be the reason you get hurt," she said, her voice cracking. "Karen is dangerous. She won't stop." I wrapped my arm around her shoulders, holding her close. "Mom, listen to me. She hurt you. She tried to silence you. If we don't see this through, she'll just find someone else to bully. I can't let that happen. Dad wouldn't want that either." Her eyes glistened with tears, but she nodded slowly. She understood. The trial date was set. The neighborhood buzzed with anticipation. Some feared Karen would wriggle her way out, but I knew this was different. This wasn't her HOA kingdom where she made up the rules. This was a courtroom, and the evidence was stacked against her like a mountain. The night before the trial, I barely slept. Memories of my mom's scream haunted me, but alongside the pain was a steady fire of determination. Tomorrow, Karen would face the truth, stripped of her lies, her power, her false crown. When the day arrived, we walked into the courthouse together, my mom leaning on me, the neighbors filling the benches behind us. Karen sat on the other side, her lawyer whispering frantically in her ear, but nothing could hide the fear in her eyes. The prosecutor laid out everything: the financial theft, the fraudulent fines, the abuse of authority. And then the videos played. The courtroom went silent except for the sound of my mother's scream echoing off the walls. People gasped, some even covering their mouths in shock. Karen buried her face in her hands, but it was too late. The world had seen her for who she really was. When my mom was asked to testify, the room held its breath. She stood slowly, fragile but unbroken, her voice trembling but steady. "All I wanted was to hang the wind chime my late husband gave me," she said softly. "I never thought it would end with me on the ground, with my dignity stripped away. But I'm here because I don't want anyone else to suffer the way I did." She thought she was above us all, but no one is above kindness. No one is above the law. Tears blurred my vision as the courtroom erupted in applause. Even the judge had to silence the room before continuing. And in that moment I realized something. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was healing. This was reclaiming everything Karen had tried to take from us. The trial wasn't over yet, but one thing was certain: Karen was no longer untouchable. Her empire was crumbling, and soon justice would crush the last stone of it. The courtroom felt like a battlefield that day, and when the session ended, the whispers of the crowd told me everything. Karen's grip was gone. Her lawyer had tried to spin the story, painting her as misunderstood, claiming the financial discrepancies were clerical errors, but no one bought it. The jury's faces were cold, the judge's eyes sharp. Still, the case wasn't decided yet, and that uncertainty gnawed at me. That night, I found my mother sitting alone in her hospital-style recliner at home. She stared at the wind chime swinging gently in the breeze, her hands folded in her lap. "Do you think this will finally be over?" she asked me softly. There was hope in her voice, but also exhaustion, as if the fight had drained the very soul out of her. I knelt beside her, resting my hand over hers. "It's not over yet, Mom, but we're closer than ever. You've already shown everyone the truth." Her lips curved into a weak smile. "Your father would be proud of you." Those words carried me through the darkest hours. They reminded me why I was fighting, not just for revenge, not just for justice, but to restore the peace my mother had always given to others. The following week, the trial continued, and every day seemed to chip away at Karen's facade. Witness after witness testified. Neighbors who had been fined for ridiculous violations, families who'd lost hundreds of dollars to maintenance fees that went nowhere, elderly couples who had lived in fear of her constant harassment. Each story painted the same picture: a woman who had thrived on cruelty and greed. But Karen wasn't going down without a fight. During recess one afternoon, she cornered me outside the courthouse. Her eyes burned with venom as she spat. "You think you've won, don't you? You've turned them all against me, but you have no idea who you're messing with." I stood my ground, my jaw tight. "No, Karen, you're the one who underestimated us. You thought you could hurt people and never pay the price. Now you're facing it." For the first time, her mask slipped completely. Her voice cracked as she hissed, "This neighborhood was mine, mine. You took everything from me." I looked at her, steady and unflinching. "You never owned this neighborhood. You just terrorized it, and now it's free." Her lawyer rushed to pull her away, but I could see it: the desperation, the crumbling ego. She wasn't the queen anymore. She was just a bitter woman clinging to the scraps of her power. The prosecutor had saved the strongest blow for last. On the final day of evidence, he revealed new records. Karen had been siphoning HOA funds into a personal account for years, using the money to pay off her debts and fund vacations. Pictures of her at luxury resorts flashed on the screen, each timestamp matching the missing funds. The gasps in the courtroom were deafening. It wasn't just abuse of power anymore, it was outright theft. When the jury filed out to deliberate, the room buzzed with tension. My mother squeezed my hand, her knuckles white. "Whatever happens, we stood up to her," she whispered. "That's what matters." But I couldn't shake the need for a real ending, for Karen to finally be stripped of everything she had used to hurt others. Hours later, the jury returned. The foreman stood, his voice firm as he read the verdict, guilty on all counts. The room erupted. My mother gasped, tears spilling down her cheeks as she buried her face in my chest. Neighbors hugged one another, relief flooding the air like sunlight after a storm. Karen, meanwhile, sat frozen in her chair, her mouth open, her face drained of all color. The judge's voice echoed as he announced her sentencing hearing would take place soon, but the words hardly mattered. The verdict had spoken louder than anything else. She was finished. Outside the courthouse, reporters gathered, their cameras flashing as neighbors spoke about the nightmare they had endured and the justice they had finally seen. My mom, fragile yet strong, stood beside me and told them, "Kindness is not weakness, and no bully, no matter how powerful they think they are, can take that away." Her words struck like thunder. That night back on our porch, the wind chime rang in the cool breeze. My mom smiled faintly as she touched it. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. "Your father's proud too." I wrapped my arm around her, but inside, I knew there was still one last chapter left to write. Karen might have been convicted, but her shadow still lingered over this community. The scars she left couldn't be erased in a single verdict. And I promised myself, when her sentencing came, I would make sure she faced the full weight of every life she had trampled. No more second chances, no more hiding behind power. For once and for all, she would know exactly what it felt like to lose everything. The day after the restraining order, I woke up earlier than usual. I hadn't slept much. My mind was replaying everything that had happened, every detail of my mom's fall, her tears, the blood on her temple, the look on Karen's smug face. But more than the pain, I kept feeling this burning fire in my chest. This wasn't over, not even close. She thought a restraining order was the end of it, but it was just the beginning of her downfall. When I came downstairs, my mom was sitting at the kitchen table, slowly sipping her tea. Her hands were trembling slightly and her eyes looked distant. I gently sat across from her. "How are you feeling today, Mom?" I asked softly. She smiled weakly, trying to hide her exhaustion. "I'll be okay," she whispered, but her voice cracked, betraying her. I reached out and held her hand. "You don't have to be strong for me. You've already been strong enough. It's my turn now." She looked at me with worried eyes. "Please, don't do anything foolish. People like her, they destroy others and then play the victim. You've seen it already. I just want peace." Her words hit me hard, but peace wasn't possible anymore. Karen had crossed the line. She had put her hands on my mother. And in my world, that wasn't something you could walk away from. Later that afternoon, I started digging deeper into Karen's history. If she wanted to play dirty, I'd make sure she drowned in the very mud she created. It didn't take long before I found HOA records and meeting notes. She had been president of the HOA for years, controlling everything, bullying families, issuing fines that didn't make sense, and in some cases, pocketing the money. I pulled up complaints from neighbors, stories of intimidation, threats, and even elderly residents being pressured to sell their homes below market value. The deeper I went, the darker it became. This wasn't just a rude neighbor. Karen was running a small empire of fear. And she'd gotten away with it for years because no one ever stood up to her. But now she had made her biggest mistake. She laid her hands on someone who wasn't going to stay silent. I made copies of everything, the complaints, the financial discrepancies, the emails I managed to dig up through neighbors who still had old correspondence. One of them even showed her blackmailing a family over violations that didn't exist. She had forced them to pay thousands or risk foreclosure. That evening I went door to door, quietly talking to families who had suffered under her rule. At first they were scared, whispering their stories, terrified of retaliation. But when I told them what she did to my mom, I saw their fear turn into something else, anger, pure, unfiltered anger. They had been waiting for someone to fight back. By the time the sun set, I had gathered a dozen sworn statements. Families who had been silenced finally spoke up. One old man broke down crying as he told me how Karen had fined him every week for his overgrown grass while his wife was in hospice, and he couldn't leave her side. Another mom told me how Karen had called CPS on her, claiming her kids were neglected just because they left their bikes on the sidewalk. She nearly lost custody until the case was dismissed. Every story stacked against her, brick by brick, building a wall of evidence that could crush her. That night I sat with my mom, showing her what I had gathered. She gasped at each page, each story, each proof of Karen's cruelty. "All this time, she was doing this to others too," she whispered. "Yes," I said firmly. "And now everyone is ready to stand against her." She thought fear was enough to control people, but she never counted on someone like me, someone with nothing to lose because she already took everything. Tears welled in my mom's eyes, but this time they weren't tears of pain. They were tears of hope. The next morning, I walked into the county office with a thick folder of evidence. The clerk's eyes widened when she saw the size of it. "All of this against one HOA president?" she asked, almost in disbelief. "Not just one president," I said coldly, "a tyrant." By noon, investigators were already on the case, and word spread fast. Neighbors who once kept their heads down now whispered openly about Karen. She felt the shift, too. That afternoon, I saw her storming around the neighborhood, red-faced, yelling at people for talking to me. But the fear was gone. People weren't bowing anymore. They were watching her, judging her, waiting. That night, as I looked out my window, I saw Karen packing her driveway, phone in hand, screaming into it. She didn't know the ground beneath her was already crumbling. The empire she built on fear and greed was about to collapse, and she had no idea how close she was to losing everything. And as I stood there in the dark, one thought burned in my mind. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was justice. The morning of Karen's downfall came quieter than I expected. The air was heavy, but it carried something different, not dread, but anticipation. My mom sat by the window, watching the street like she was waiting for something. She didn't say it, but I knew she was hoping today would finally bring her peace. I spent the night going over everything again, the evidence, the statements, the countless stories of neighbors who had suffered in silence. All of it had been submitted to the county investigator, and he promised action would be swift, but I wanted to see it with my own eyes. Around 10, two unmarked county vehicles pulled up on our street. A hush fell across the neighborhood. Curtains twitched, doors cracked open. People were watching, holding their breath. And then 3 uniformed officers stepped out, followed by a man in a suit holding a stack of papers. They walked straight toward Karen's house. Karen was outside, watering her perfectly trimmed hedges, pretending the world still belonged to her. When she saw the officers, she froze. Her smug smile flickered into confusion, then panic. "Can I help you?" she demanded, voice shrill and trembling. The man in the suit unfolded the papers. "Karen Whitfield, we have a warrant to search your property and seize HOA financial records. You're also being served with multiple charges, including fraud, embezzlement, and assault." The watering can clattered to the ground. "This is insane," she screeched. "I am the HOA, you can't do this. These are lies, all lies." But the officers were already moving. One stepped behind her, reading her rights. Another walked into her garage to secure records. She thrashed and fought, but her power was gone. The neighbors, the very people she had terrorized for years, were standing on their lawns, watching, whispering. And then, one by one, they started clapping. It wasn't loud at first, just a ripple. But it grew. Applause echoed down the street, stronger, heavier, drowning out Karen's screams. My mom, standing weakly by the window, pressed her hand to her mouth. Tears streamed down her cheeks, but this time they weren't from pain, they were from relief. I stepped outside, my chest heavy but proud. Karen's wild eyes locked onto me as the cuffs clicked around her wrists. "This is your doing," she spat, venom in every word. I didn't flinch. "No," I said coldly. "This is justice, for my mom, for everyone." The officers guided her into the vehicle as she kicked and screamed, but it didn't matter anymore. Her reign was over. As the police cars pulled away, something amazing happened. Neighbors, people who hadn't dared speak before, came up to us. They hugged my mom, whispered thank yous, shared their relief. One old man held my hand with trembling fingers and whispered, "You saved us." Later that week, the HOA board dissolved. A new committee formed, made up of fair, decent neighbors. They vowed transparency, kindness, and real community. The atmosphere shifted almost overnight. Kids played in the streets without parents fearing harassment. Families finally felt at home again. And my mom, she slowly started to heal. The bruises faded, but more importantly, the fear left her eyes. She could walk down the street again without looking over her shoulder. Every time a neighbor smiled at her, she smiled back. She wasn't broken anymore. One evening, as the sun set, she sat with me on the porch. She placed her frail hand on mine and whispered, "You gave me back my dignity. You gave all of us our freedom. Your father would be proud of you." Her words broke something in me. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded, because I knew this wasn't just about revenge. It was about making sure no one else would ever suffer under Karen again. Karen thought she was untouchable. She thought fear would always protect her. But in the end, it was her own cruelty that destroyed her. And justice, sweet, undeniable justice, finally won. The neighborhood was free. My mom was safe. And Karen, well, Karen's empire of fear crumbled in front of everyone. And I made myself a silent promise that night. If anyone ever tried to hurt my family again, they'd learn the same lesson Karen did. Some lines you just don't cross. Because when you do, justice will find you.